that going there, Sean? All right, I'll just get you to introduce yourself, Sean, and tell me a bit about your organisation.
So, Sean Ryan, I'm Executive Officer of Private Forestry Service Queensland. We're a not-for-profit group that assists landholders in the management of their native forests, as well as plantation development, revegetation and extension and education and you name it.
We're talking about the need for hardwood and the need for these private timber plantations, but realistically, how difficult is it to establish it?
Well, I suppose today we're actually more talking about the management of the existing forests, so native forests. So we've got a very extensive resource in that area, and you would say that it's not rocket science to manage it, but there's a lot of misunderstanding about a lot of trees is a good result, whereas the reality is most of our forests are grossly overstocked from previous either harvest intervention or it's just regrowth from that's crept across from existing forests. Most of the time there's at least 10 times more trees there than should be there, so it's a matter of choosing the right trees to retain and removing the rest of them.
How much work are you getting in this industry with people calling you into their properties and asking for advice?
Well, we've got a pretty extensive project on at the moment that's running across southern Queensland, and we're running about 40 field days and 10 four-day workshops and other associated extension work. So we're getting a very good roll-up to them. We're getting around 20 to 30 people attending those one-day field days, which is definitely an increase from the past when we've been doing this. So there's a lot of interest in there, and I guess that there's starting to be a realisation that our resource is fairly finite at the moment, and that the likelihood of our hardwood supply is going to be diminished into the future. And indeed, we would hope some understanding that the sourcing of hardwood from dubiously managed forest areas in Papua New Guinea or the Solomons or other areas of Southeast Asia isn't an economically or environmentally sustainable process.
If there was one thing you could ask governments to do, what would it be?
Give people the long-term security that they're going to be able to manage their forest into the future. There's continuously sort of nibbling at the side, or death by 1,000 cuts, or some other new legislation being brought in, or even if it's just the Chinese whispers of that happening, that hold off on people actually spending the money on their forest that's required to manage those forests.
And thinning sounds like it is a very big part of that, to get the good timber growing that's valuable.
Look, it's the most critical thing that we can suggest. When you're trying to spread the moisture and nutrients and the attributes of the soil over 1,000 trees instead of 100 trees, and you can imagine the result of that is none of them grow. They all lock up and sit there for a very long time and just develop fault and ultimately they become unhealthy and die.
Can you have a balance between maintaining an environment for native flora and fauna and private timber plantations?
Well, what we are finding that the wildlife, particularly animals that are dependent on arboreal nests like gliders and even koalas, have a higher preference for managed forests in the areas, and that's simply because a glider has been designed and developed over hundreds of thousands of years to glide 50 to 100 metres. When you've got 1,000 trees in his way, he's not going to go very far before he hits another tree, and that gliding mechanism doesn't work very well, and so he moves out into the more open forest, and that's because that's his natural habitat.
And what has changed in the makeup of the forests, the open sclerophyll, which is, your more open forest, and the closed forest?
Well, I guess if you want to go back to the management by the Aboriginals, they maintained quite a wide space forest, and they burnt regularly, and they maintained that forest and the open areas very carefully in that area. And so that's why our the mammals that inhabit those areas are dependent on those wide spaces because they've lived with that for 60,000 years and more.
Sean Ryan, as the CEO of Private Forestry Services Queensland, what do you think of the LnPeas promise to the industry of $6 million in investment should they get in?
Look, I'm always wary of investment. What I want to make sure, it's very positive, but I want to make sure that money is targeted towards outcomes, and in the end, the outcome is a much more healthy and productive and environmentally sustainable native forest area. The hardwood plantations has been, unfortunately most of our hardwood plantations were put in at the same time as the research was being done in the establishment of those plantations, and you would have to say that it wasn't particularly successful. We do know how to grow hardwood plantations. It's a fairly expensive process compared to the much quicker results that we're going to get out of reducing those grossly overstocked native forests down to a good healthy stocking rate there, where all the trees are actually happily growing and growing at a reasonable rate instead of just sitting there.
So where do you find the balance? Because, I mean, if you look at, there's a lot of concern at the moment in your industry, listening to the people in there today, about plans to further, bring these clearing legislation back in.
I guess at some stage, the people who are wanting to achieve those clearing legislations, and look, I'm not, the areas that we've got under mapped remnant vegetation now is not a problem, and we can harvest within those areas as long as we abide by the code of practice. What I'm concerned about is that there's going to be a layer of restrictions put in over that area, and that further erodes the general farmers' not just the ability to plan, but these are long-term investments. It takes a long time to grow a tree to the point of harvest, and so if they invest $200, $300 per hectare in thinning out their forests, and they have that right removed from them before that they can realise the returns from that, then that's a very big impost on a very limited amount of money that most of those landholders actually have. So obviously that's critical to our future. We have 40 hardwood sawmills in Queensland. The majority of them are employing 40 to 50 people each, mostly in regional areas, most of them with long-term, all-year-round work, not seasonal work, which often happens in rural areas. We've got to understand and recognise that employment in an industry that is a truly sustainable industry. We're not digging a hole in the ground. We're not consuming great quantities of electricity to produce the end product. It's by far the most sustainable building product we've got, and a simple process of cutting a tree down for harvest and replacing that tree with 3 or 4 trees in its place is as simple as it can get.
So have you taken a political stance in this election period?
No, it never pays to take a political stance. I'm taking a scientific stance. We can demonstrate on every level that our industry